and welcome as we return once more to Warhammer the Old World. I'm a bit of an Old World fan, as you may have guessed from my earlier videos. I'm very excited by the Old World coming back, hopefully later this year, and I thought it was an ideal time to talk about some of the great books that have been written about the Old World over the years. I'm quite fortunate that I've been collecting Black Library novels basically since they started, so I've got quite a lot of them. And I had a little bit of a look through my collection, in particular the ones that I enjoyed reading the most, compared that against what's still available from Games Workshop, from Black Library's web store, in particular in the form of ebooks for some of the classics. And I have compiled what I consider to be my top 10 Warhammer Old World novels in terms of giving a flavour of the lore for those particular parts of the Old World that are covered in those books, but also what I think are just absolutely stonking reads. So join me as we count down through my top 10. We're going to start with a book that's not actually on this stack next to me because I couldn't find my copy. It's in a box somewhere, unfortunately. The Burning Shore. This is a book by Robert Earl. He wrote, I think, 3, maybe 4 books. It was 4 books set in various parts of the Old World, all dealing with a dissolute Bretonnian nobleman known as Florin d'Artaud. The Burning Shore is the first, and I would say the best, of his Warhammer Old World novels. It deals with Florin joining a Dogs of War style mercenary company as they travel across the world pond to Lustria on a quest for gold. And it really is one of probably the best books written in terms of the background of lizard men, who unfortunately didn't get much of a look in for many of the novels were written set during the Old World. It's a great story both in terms of an adventure novel, in terms of diving into the background of Lustria, and of course it has Dogs of War in, and who doesn't like Dogs of War? Robert Earl went on to write, I think, 3 more books, one of which was set in the streets of Marienburg, one of them was set on the steppes of the Ogre Kingdoms, and I think the third and final one dealt with the Strigoi, more kind of as a gateway to a character that was introduced in, I think, the 2nd or 3rd book, where, again, it deals with kind of the Badlands and the Strigoi caravans, Strigani caravans that roam through the area. But yeah, so number 10. The Burning Shore. Now we go on to books that I actually have in the stack next to me. Number 9, Skarsnik by Guy Healy. Now, I hadn't read this when it first came out. I read it when it was announced as the Reader's Choice book for this year, and I love Guy Healy's writing. He's a great novelist. In particular, I love some of the stuff he's done with kind of the Ultramarine successors. Nova Marines is my go-to Space Marine chapter, and yeah, he wrote a fantastic book all about the Nova Marines invading a space hulk. But Skarsnik, there are many books that are written from the point of view of antagonists, and in particular I think I have to call out to Gloomspite by my friend Andy Clark, which is a fantastic book set in the Immortal Realms, dealing with kind of the gloomy dank, as it's called. But Skarsnik, I think, is almost feels like it's the source material from which all other such books are drawn. Skarsnik, as you may have guessed from the title, is the story of the most notable of all Bad Moon Night Goblin chieftains. It's the story of how he became king of Carrack 8 Peaks, or the City of Pillars as it's also known, and how he rose from a puny runt to being the dramatic figure that he became towards the end of the end times. What I would say about it is it's a great book. I feel it almost just peters out a little bit at the end. There's a framing device that's used to tell the story, which is great, and I would have liked a little bit more closure on the very end of that. But no, nonetheless, comes in at my number 9 position, therefore. Fantastic book, well worth a read. I'm going to cheat a little bit, so some of the books are now available as an omnibus from Black Library, and therefore I am going to count trilogies as a single book. That's how I get away with concluding all 3 of the C.L. Werner, Matthias Thulman Witch Hunter novels. These were brilliant books. So these, as you might imagine, deal very specifically with parts of the Old World, with what I feel was very much almost like an Eisenhorn trilogy set in the Old World. It's all the story of a Sigmarite witch hunter and his companions as they hunt down the various nefarious denizens of darkness across the Old World. It's one of these ones where he's very much an anti-hero. He's kind of a Punisher style, doing bad to do good type character, and yeah, they're now available as an omnibus. I very much enjoyed reading these. In fact, going through this stack made me want to read these again, so they are now back on my reading pile in preparation for me doing my Empire army, and I think I'm going to have to include a Witch Hunter hero in my Averland force. But C.L. Werner's Witch Hunter trilogy comes in at number 8. Number 7 is another book that I got in ebook rather than in the paperback style. It's one I hadn't read when it was released at the time, but I'm going to definitely recommend it to you now. I think I've recommended it before in one of my previous Withering videos. It's Anthony Reynolds' Bretonnian Knights series. This would have been much higher, let me say, in the series, but for 2 reasons. Firstly, it's set during the kind of 6th edition background of Bretonnians, and as I think I've stated during my Bretonnia lore video, I prefer the 5th edition Bretonnia lore. But nonetheless, Anthony Reynolds is a brilliant writer. It's a bit of a shame, really, he's not writing more stuff for Games Workshop, but he's got his own books out that are well worth a look, and you can get, again, an omnibus of his Bretonnian Knights stories from the Black Library website. They are essentially charting the course of a single knight all the way through his progression from knight-errant in the first book, a Knight of the Realm in the second book. You start to get the trend here. And then in the 3rd and 4th novellas, and this is the other reason it isn't higher up my ranking, we deal with his journey as a questing knight and a Grail Knight. The Questing Knight and Grail Knight novels feel a little rushed. It's a shame that they are a novella rather than a fully fleshed out novel. I think there was definitely scope, certainly in the Grail Knight story, for it to be a full length book. Still a great read though. Clocks in therefore at my position number 7, and I heartily recommend giving it a read. Staying in the Bretonnian vein, I know I've talked about this before, but The Red Duke. This is the only author I think actually who gets 2 look-ins on this stack of top 10. C.L. Werner again writing in the old world, and I do like his writing style. There's a few other books that he read that I would recommend checking out. So, C.L. Werner's Red Duke is a retelling of the classic Circle of Blood story that was in a One Fantasy campaign pack. I'm not going to reiterate that now. You can go and check out my separate Circle of Blood video if you want the whole story. But he very cleverly takes the background that was set out in the 5th edition campaign pack and then weaves it into a much broader, wider narrative with a brilliant framing device for how the story is told. It's probably, I think, his best book that he wrote set in the Warhammer world, and that's why it clocks in at number 6, ousting the Bounty Hunter, the Witch Hunter novels, and not even giving the Bounty Hunter novels a look in this. I'm going to keep ploughing onwards as we come into the top 5 now. Number 5... The Ambassador Chronicles. Again, a slight cheat. This is actually 2 books combined into 1. Again, you can get the omnibus from the Black Library website, but this is the story of a Empire ambassador sent to Kislev at the start of the Great War against Chaos. It's a really gripping read, both in terms of the first sort of half of this story is a kind of a gripping story of intrigue and mystery at the Kislev court in the build-up to the war against Chaos, and then the second half of the book is literally the Chaos invasion. Graham McNeill, I mean, we all know Graham McNeill knows how to write. Anybody who hasn't checked out his Uriel Ventris series or his entries into the Horus Heresy series, go and check those out. But by God, this is probably one of the best books set in Kislev, I would say, and probably one of the best Empire books that came out during the time set in the Old World, very specifically focusing on the story of soldiers of the Empire and human war against Chaos. Clocks at number 5 though, because it is against some strong contenders, which I'm going to move on to now. Number 4 in the list, Jack Yeovil, Beasts in Velvet. So again, this is one of the really old Black Library novels that was written way back, I think during 3rd or 4th edition fantasy, and then was republished when Black Library became a thing. Jack Yeovil is actually a pseudonym for the famous author Kim Newman, and this story is essentially, it's a murder mystery set in Altdorf. It doesn't carry within it any wider themes of, you know, the Great War against Chaos. There's no fate of the old world at stake here. Well, there is an element. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but at its heart, it's a serial killer story. It's a Criminal Minds episode set in the Warhammer fantasy world. We have a Elector Count tasked with uncovering who is behind this series of grisly murders. We have a very obviously pastiche watch captain, Dirty Harold, who carries a throwing knife from the famous dwarven knife makers Magnins, and it is in fact the largest throwing knife ever produced. So powerful, in fact, it can take a man's head clean off. You can see where they're going with this. But also there is the third figure on the cover here, there is a seeress. And again, this deals with that slightly murky way in which magic and witchcraft was treated in the Old World. And in particular, I think this is something we'll see more of when the Old World comes out as a game, because the old world, it's, as I've noted before in my previous videos, is set before the establishment of the Colleges of Magic by Teclis. And so really, the way in which she is treated as a second-class citizen, a figure of suspicion, is very much something I think will be a theme in the old world. It's a brilliant book. I love crime stories to begin with. I mean, this is long before the establishment of the Warhammer crime franchise. I really hope that we get more of these. I'd love to see a return to some of these characters when the old world launches, perhaps under the Warhammer crime banner headline. But that clocks in at number 4, only because there are even better books up the stack, which I'm going to keep moving through. Again, another trilogy that is now available as an omnibus, so I am cheating and using this as a single book. It is Simon Savile's Von Carstein trilogy. I love vampires as a set of protagonists / antagonists in the Warhammer world, and perhaps one of the greatest story arcs within the old world, except for Wars Against Chaos, is the invasion and the War of the Vampire Counts. This is nicely broken down into 3 books, each dealing with 3 of the major participants in that. The first one, Dominion, deals with Vlad von Carstein, the original Flavor von Carstein. The second one, Inheritance, deals with Conrad van Carstein, the Caligula, the Mad Duke, that was a few bats short of a belfry of the von Carstein bloodline. And finally, Retribution. We get to a guy who is still causing trouble in the mortal realms even today, Manfred von Carstein, perhaps the most cunning of all his ilk. It is a very well written trilogy. It's a shame Simon Savile didn't write really anything else for the old world, but it comes in at number 3 spot simply because it is such a page turner. I'm going to move on now to my number 2. Then I'm going to do a couple of honourable mentions before I hit my number 1 spot. So this may be slightly contentious. Number 2, I've gone with Skaven Slayer. Now, I could, in theory, have just brought my entire stack of Gotrek and Felix novels here, but I picked Skaven Slayer specifically because I think this is probably my favourite of the Gotrek and Felix novels that were written by William King. There are some great Gotrek and Felix stories that were written later by Nathan Long, but I think Bill King, as the inventor of Gotrek and Felix and one of the original great storytellers of the Warhammer world, has to be mentioned here. He's in the number 2 spot simply because the book I'm going to reveal as my number 1 spot in a few minutes is my absolute favourite book set in the Warhammer world. But I picked Skaven Slayer because it's the first one where we get to see Grey Seer Thanquol as the nemesis of Gotrek and Felix, and I love me a bit of Skaven hijinks, and I know that he lurked as a kind of background villain for much of the rest of their novels. But Skaven Slayer in particular is the first one. We get to see all the different aspects of the clans. We get to see the great empire city of Nuln in all its glory. It's before we got introduced to the characters of Ulrika and Max and Snorri Nosebiter, so it's before that kind of ensemble cast perhaps detracted a little bit from the relationship between Gotrek and Felix. And it is just such a good read. So if you're looking for a book, you could start with Troll Slayer, which collects a few of the original short stories that Bill King wrote about Gotrek and Felix. But if you're looking for a book to introduce you to these 2 great characters, you can't go far wrong with Skaven Slayer. It's included in the first Gotrek and Felix omnibus as well. So, as I said, before I get on to my number 1 spot, I want to do a couple of honourable mentions. These are books that unfortunately are not now available on the Black Library store, so I haven't included them in my top 10, but they are definitively worthy of mention because they are both excellent books. First of all, Riders of the Dead by Dan Abner. Dan Abner didn't write much in the Warhammer Old World. He wrote one other book, I think, called Fell Cargo, that was a kind of a pirate story. But this was coming off the back of the Gaunt's Ghosts series, coming off the back of the Eisenhorn trilogy. He wrote a single novel set in the kind of steppes, featuring Empire soldiers battling against the northern tribes. I'm realising as I'm saying this, he did go on and write kind of an adaptation of the Malice Darkblade story from Warhammer Monthly into a series of novels, which you can still get on the Black Library website, but I feel as they're not necessarily standalone stories, but rather an expansion and continuation of the Darkblade story. Riders of the Dead, it's a great book. Sadly, as far as I'm aware, not available now on the Black Library website. Maybe it'll come up on a Reader's Choice Award in the future and become re-available again. The other one that's worthy of mention is Zavant. Now, this was Gordon Rennie writing this, and if you ever asked yourself, what would happen if Sherlock Holmes lived in the old world, look no further than Zavant Coniger. essentially an investigator solving a number of Sherlock Holmesian crimes in the city of Altdorf. There are a couple of short stories about Zavent Koniger. One of them is in Hammer and Bolter, and one's a standalone that you can get on as little kind of 1.99 ebooks on the Black Library website. But this original book, which they wrote, is unfortunately no longer available. Again, another one that if you ever see it come up on the Reader's Choice Awards, definitely vote for. That's my two honourable mentions, therefore, that would have otherwise perhaps made it into this top 10. I'm going to move on now to my number one personal pick, and I'm sure people will disagree with me on this, but Drachenfels. Like I said, there are only a couple of authors that get repeat appearances in this. C.L. Werner is one of them. Jack Yeovil, it's Kim Newman, let's be honest. How can you not love Genevieve Duodone? As I've mentioned in my characters I'd love to see in the Old World video, I'd love to see Genevieve get her own rules, I'd love to see Genevieve get her own model. Genevieve Duodone featured over 3 books. This one, Genevieve Undead and Silver Nails, all of which were published in the original short stories way back before Black Library existed, and then republished in this style edition once Black Library became a thing. They were written in the late 80s. They reflect a different style of fantasy to the later Old World. It's still that slightly wild and ill-defined version of the Warhammer Fantasy background that still left room for, I guess, slightly more high fantasy tropes. It's a story about a person's past. So it's a story about what would happen if you were a hero. Lord is having beaten Sauron, beaten the Dark Lord in essence, and to the point where people write plays about your adventures. And then, because you are an immortal vampire, you live beyond your legend. You live in your legend and are asked to reface and revisit scenes that were perhaps part of your earlier life and revisit those demons. I'm not going to tell you the story of this. You can look it up or buy your own copy of it. But suffice to say, if I had to pick one book from the Warhammer Old World to read again for the first time, it would be Drachenfels. I wish I could go back and read this again for the first time. Thank you then, that's my brief rundown of books that I think are my top 10 of Warhammer the Old World. If you think I've missed anything or you are outraged at the order in which these have been put, please mention it in the comments below. I'd love to get other people's take on this. If there are books that you think perhaps shouldn't have been in the top 10, that there are much better books, again, put it in the comments below. Let's get a bit of a discussion going. In the meantime, thanks very much for watching this. If you've not already subscribed, can I please ask people to subscribe? Because I'm creeping upwards towards 1,000 subscribers, and I'm going to do another kind of Ask Me Anything video with my daughter once I hit 1,000 subscribers. In the meantime, though, thanks very much for watching, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.